Lesson 4, Exodus, return to the promised land, the calling. Lesson 4, so we're going to be in Exodus, the third chapter. Third chapter, we're going to start with verse 1, which is a good place to start. It says, Meanwhile, Moses was shepherding the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. So where I wanted to start tonight, last week we were talking about, and at the time, even the week before, had talked about, it said another Pharaoh came up that didn't know Joseph and so on. So I thought we'd start with that tonight and look at the different dynasties and where they think he might have, which one it might have been at which particular time. So this is in the 12th dynasty, and you can see you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 9 there. Okay.
Do you just throw the alphabet up in the air and wherever they land?
Yeah, that's what they do. Don't try to write all these names down. That's not the purpose in this exercise this evening. It's for you to remember the names. Do I? Some of them have very few vowels and a lot of consonants. The 12th dynasty, and you see you have all those listed in the 12th dynasty. Then you have and this is 2 more in the 12th dynasty. And then you have the 14th dynasty. And it says, if you'll see what it says, they're lesser kings who were contemporaneous with the 13th and the 15th dynasty, so we don't have good records on those. And then you have the 15th dynasty during the Hyksos, which was a group of people from elsewhere, from the Asian countries that had taken over at that particular time. And they list 3 there, and you see 2 of them have question marks, don't even know what years they were. But there were more than that in the 16th dynasty. And it says here the Hyksos, a group of mixed Asiatic people in the second intermediate period around 1650 to 1550 BC, or BCE is what it says here. So we're still in the 16th dynasty, then the 17th dynasty, and it lists several there, and then it has 4 more. It has question marks, and it has question marks on the last one there as exactly when it is. You have to remember, this is these dates that we're looking at are BC. So that was a long time ago. And then get into the 18th dynasty. You might recognize some of these names, Thutmose the first, Thutmose second and third, and so on, and the 4th. And then in the continuing through there, all the way down to Tutankhamun. Who was Tutankhamun? King Tut that you read about, that's who he was. This one, Tutankhamun. And you can see he didn't live very long. It was a very short reign. So then we have the 19th dynasty, and they have Ramesses I, Seti I, Ramesses II, and so on down to the last one there. And that's the last of the ones that I printed. Now, why did I do this? One reason, I wanted you to get an idea of how it says another Pharaoh arose. So which Pharaoh was it, and how many Pharaohs was there between when we're talking about Moses here, and Moses comes on the scene. And you can see I have this one in italics. This is the one that some people think was Ramesses II. Seti I was his father. And if you remember the movie The 10 Commandments, it had Seti was the first one that was alive, and then he died, and then Yul Brynner, who played Ramesses II, was next. And that's the one that some of them believe was the king at this particular, or the Pharaoh at this particular time. So if that's the case, how many years was it they were in captivity? About 400 years. So we can look here at Ramesses, 1279, 1213. So about 400 years before would be about 1600, right? 1600 and something, depending on how many years you go by. So before him there was 1, 2, wrong way. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and then you have all these 22, 23, 24, 25. You have 25 there, and getting back, so we're about to 1600 now, and you can go back a little further than that. So you see there's about 30 of them before, when it gets back to where whichever one it was, and even back before then was in the 1600s, could have been back this far. So there was about 30 pharaohs from the one that was Pharaoh when Joseph was living. From him until Ramesses II was about over 30 pharaohs. That's a lot of pharaohs. How many of those were good to the children of Israel and how many were not? We don't know. So let's go back. The one that I think the most evidence for as being, where did I miss him? Nope. Get on back here. Well, 1700. Okay, that's the way I'm going. I want to make sure which way it was. So come on down. I forget which one runs which way. So the one I have italicized here is Amenhotep the second. And that's the one I think is the most evidence for. That's like 200 years different between Ramesses and him. So if you go back from his, if he was the Pharaoh at the time of Moses, then you go back from his, let's see if I can get going the right way here. Nope, going the wrong way. It going the right. It would be, he was 14, so that'd be about 1825, somewhere around in there. So we go all the way back to 18s. Oh, here. Would be in here somewhere, and there's about 30 pharaohs between them. So regardless of which one it was, there was about 30-some pharaohs between the one when Joseph was there that put Joseph as second in command of the children of the Egyptians, when his family came there. That particular Pharaoh, there was about 30 pharaohs between him and the one that was Pharaoh when Moses came on the scene. So you can see why when I see in pictures, when I see that, it helps me understand better how you have a Pharaoh down here in Moses' day who would enslave people, but back here there was one that really liked Joseph. So the question was there 28 of them that liked Joseph and his family and was good to the children of Israel, or was it half of them? Was it 15 of them? Was it? But when you see that many, and how many it went through at that particular time in that 400 to 430 year period of time, that's a lot of people to go through. So we don't know if it was the last one that finally turned against the children of Israel or not. So I'm trying to do some house cleaning before we get further along tonight. Next question, we're back to our scripture. And it says, meanwhile, Moses was shepherding the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And I said, how old was Moses at this time? At the time, because we're going to be, in this particular time is when Moses is going to see the burning bush. So how old was he at this time? Anybody have any idea? You're okay. And when Stephen was just before he was stoned, he goes through a history of the children of Israel. And here's what he says in 7:23. He says, when Moses was 40 years old, he decided to visit his own people, the Israelites. He saw one of them being mistreated by an Egyptian, so he went to his defense and avenged him, killing the Egyptian. So he's 40 years old. Then in the 30th verse, he says, after 40 years had passed, so that would make him 80. How old was he when he died? 120. His life is easily divided into three 40-year sections in our scripture. So after 40 years he had passed, and the angel appeared to Moses in the flames of a burning bush in the desert near Mount Sinai. So, doing some more housekeeping here, getting things. But last week I mentioned that who was Moses' father-in-law's name? What was his name? And so the name that you mentioned was Jethro, but it's also in the Bible in Exodus 2:18 and in Numbers it mentions his name as Reuel, and Hobab is what he's mentioned as in the book of Judges. So what was his name? Could be yes, and it could be a different translation, and it could be the first one. Some of the theologians, and we don't know if this is true, think that that was a title. That was the area he was from. He was given that title because he was the head of a clan. I don't know if that's true or not, but he's referred by all those names. So as we're going forward, if you see any one of those names, and you won't see Hobab because that's just in the book of Judges, and we're not going to get that far. We won't get to the book of Judges tonight, so you don't have to worry about it. So, meanwhile, Moses was shepherding the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. It says, he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness. How far side of the wilderness was he? Here is Mount Horeb. They think Mount Horeb and Mount Sinai is the same mountain or the same area. So this is where Mount Horeb was. This is where he was. This is where he was tending the sheep. Well, over here is where Midian is. What's between them? Well, he had to take them a long way from home to get over to here, because he had to travel around. He had to put them on boats. I doubt he swam them across. But so it was good. In fact, if you look over here at this map, you can see it, where it's marked Midian, and down here Mount Sinai, and the gulf that's in between them. Of course, we know this is the Suez Canal now, where they cut it through there. But back then, he would have had to go all the way around here. So he was a long way from his home in Midian when this occurred. Is that important? Not necessarily. But he was in the wilderness. That's the point. He was in the wilderness. This was 40 years after. What did he start out in life as? After he was born and he was taken in by the Pharaoh's daughter, he started out in the family of royalty. He was the adopted grandson of the Pharaoh. And he goes from there to wandering in the wilderness for 40 years over here, and he's tending a bunch of sheep. I have a quote here by Winston Churchill. He went through a period in his life that he called his wilderness years, and we won't get into that. But here's what he said. Every prophet has come from civilization, but every prophet has to go into the wilderness. He must have a strong impression of a complex society and all that it has to give. And then he must serve periods of isolation and meditation. This is the process by which psychic dynamite is made. Winston Churchill. So he says the wilderness, he was saying that he didn't think so at the time. The wilderness years when he was not very popular, Winston Churchill went through that and became probably the most famous man of the 20th century. I've told you this story before, but I think it was a girl in to show how famous he was back at that time, how well known he was. A girl in, I think, South America wrote a letter to Winston Churchill, and she said, to the most famous man in the world, and it went to his address. That's pretty famous. If you do that, it's not going to come to my house. So anyway, he was in the wilderness. He was spending time there in the wilderness. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire within a bush. As Moses looked, he saw that the bush was on fire, but was not consumed. So Moses thought, I must go over and look at this remarkable sight. Why isn't the bush burning up? And if you were grazing your flock and you saw a bush on fire, what would you do? I have 2 firefighters in my family. They'd put it out. But Moses, he wants to see, because it's burning, but it's not burning up. So he wants to see what's going on. I don't know. I'd been as curious as Moses, because it's kind of an unusual thing to see. But he had to go. So Moses thought, I must go over and look at this remarkable sight. Why isn't the bush burning? In life, We all make choices when looking at life. Am I seeing a miracle? So is childbirth a miracle? Is thought a miracle? Is consciousness a miracle? Is any of this miraculous? Depending on how you define a miracle, doesn't it? Childbirth is not that miraculous when you think about it's been going on for ages, ever since the beginning of man. Childbirth has been going on. Consciousness has been around for a long time. So is this really a miracle? Or is miracle something that's out of the ordinary? Elizabeth Barrett Browning wrote this: "Earth is crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. But only he who sees takes off his shoes." Only he who sees. So everything, what she's saying is everything in the world has the presence of God, and it is a sense miraculous. Now, what was different between everyday things that we say are miraculous, the fact that I can, without even thinking, I can move my fingers around and I can stand up here and talk, and I don't have to think of what, I don't have to think, well, now I've got to move my mouth and I've got to form these words, and all these things just come without me having to put a lot of thought into it. You go to sleep at night, you dream, your brain's still working, all that seemed miraculous. But what separates that and what's happening with Moses at this time? What makes it different? What makes this different with what Moses is seeing? Because if a bush is on fire, what's going to happen to it? It's going to burn up. What happened to the one that he had? It didn't burn up. One of the most important lessons of life is that almost everything important is a choice. Moses had to make a choice here. He had to make a decision of what to do. And what if he'd have made the wrong choice? What if Moses had decided, that looks scary to me, I'm going to take my sheep somewhere else? What would have happened? Where would we be? Where would the people of Israel have been? It's funny how little decisions can lead to such drastic changes if they didn't occur. And one Sunday afternoon, I went skating at skating rink back in 1973, and I met her. Well, what if I hadn't gone to the skating rink? What if I decided not to go that day? What if she decided not to go that day? When it came time, they had a trio skate, and she was there with her girlfriend. She came over and asked me to skate. What if she'd asked somebody else? I don't know why she picked me, but she picked me, and it started. And because of that, now we have children and we have grandchildren. I'm standing up here, and my life would have been much different if I'd just decided not to go to the skating rink that day. So decisions are important. It says we must decide for ourselves if there's a God. If there's no God, life is ultimately pointless, the product of random chance. That's the decision we have to make. We have to decide whether we're going to, just like Moses had to make a decision there, we have to make a decision if we're going to believe there is a God or there is not a God. I think about it a lot of times, and I've had conversations with atheists before who their parents were atheists and their parents were atheists. What would they logically be? They would be atheists. What if I was born into an atheist family? I'm tickled that I was not. Secular scholar of Greek philosophy, writing in the New York Times, wrote this: "Eventually, everything ends in heat death. The universe certainly started with a bang, but it likely ends with a fizzle." Does that sound like it's a very positive outlook on life? I don't think so. What is it that gives life meaning? And that's what I have here. Without someone or something that have created us and put us here for a purpose, what meaning would there be in life? You think of somebody who's an atheist. They believe they're just born here by random chance, and being born here by random chance, when they die, They're just going to cease to exist, and their body will decay away. Have to make choices. And how many of you watched the Antiques Roadshow back in 2016 when this guy brought this white and black striped blanket and it was hanging up there on the rack? Did you know, any of you ever see that? Well, let me tell you what happened. He was sitting there talking with him, and while he was talking, the guy was talking about what he had there, and he said, "This is a very rare blanket." And they got down to talking about how much it was worth, and they said, "It's worth over $500,000 for that blanket." He said, "I had it laying across the back of my couch. It had passed down as a family, over $500,000. Well, let me carry the story a little further. In Unilad News Story, I'm going to read this because it's a quote. "This was the case of Lauren Kritzer, whose life changed in 70 seconds after watching an episode on PBS and PBS's Antique Roadshow. The California native was scrapping by on disability checks before making the shocking discovery. Lauren had been involved in a 2007 near-fatal car accident, resulting in his leg being amputated. He was down on his luck, renting out his friend's shack in Leona Valley with just $200 left to live on each month. He was in bad shape. But he could never have predicted how his fate would change after simply watching TV one day. What if he decided not to watch TV that day? A man had a similar blanket to Lauren's evaluation on Antiques Roadshow. Lauren watched the PBS show in amazement when a man brought on a blanket that looked just like his own family heirloom. Antiques Roadshow experts told the man his 1800 Navajo blanket would be worth up to $500,000. Lauren's own blanket, passed down from his grandmother, had been sitting back in the back of his closet. Look what he sold it for. This blanket that was sitting in the back of his closet, he sold for $1.4 million. You think he was glad that he was watching PBS that night? Think he's glad that he made that choice. Choices make a difference. But here's the point. Who gave it value? What gave that blanket value? Why was a black and white striped blanket worth $1.4 million? What gives life value? If you don't believe there's a God, you don't believe there's any purpose in life, what value is there in life? Moses was out here in the wilderness with a flock of sheep a long way from home. He had to make a decision, and he made a decision that he was going to go see what was going on with that burning bush. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called out to him from the bush, "Moses, Moses, here I am." He answered. You notice that God didn't speak to him until he came over there? Didn't say a word to him. Isn't that the way it is in most cases? We sometimes wonder why God doesn't speak to us, but have we initiated the conversation? Have we done anything on our part? Have we shown our belief in him and what value he gives to this world? And have we therefore seen that, have we acted like we believe that he would communicate with us? Moses did. And because of doing that, "Do not come closer," he said. "Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." He said, the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he continued, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at him. Why was the ground holy? What made that piece of dirt, that sand, whatever it was, what made it holy? It was the presence of God that made it holy. We'll do things, and we tend to have a tendency to make idols out of normal, everyday things. We'll worship things, whether it's wealth, whether it's a house, whether it's family, whatever it is. We worship things. We worship things in nature. So, Jesus healed blind people. What's the right way? What is the right way to heal somebody that's blind? God touched one in Matthew 9:27, two of them, and healed them. Then in Matthew 8, he spit on the eyes of a man and healed him. He made clay out of spittle in John 9 and healed somebody, had him to wash off in the pool of Siloam. And then he just spoke the words. Why did Jesus do it these different ways? What's your opinion? Why do you think Jesus did it different ways? Why do you think when he was healing, you notice when he was healing people in the Bible, he didn't always do it the same way. He used many different methods, and just healing the blind happened to be one where I could see several different methods here. And he used different methods to heal blinded eyes. I think the reason is because they would think if he made clay, if he spit on the ground and made clay and put it on their eyes and had him to go wash in the pool of Siloam, we human beings would say, that's the way you get blind eyes healed. We can't heal it any other way. We can't do it any other way. Why do we have church service the way we have it? I don't think any of us here worship our church service. I don't think we worship this building. What makes this building any different than any other building? It's because what it was built for, what it was put here for. Now, I can tell you just, I walked up there a few minutes ago to get my microphone, and when I walk into that auditorium, I feel different walking in there than I do other places. Does that mean the presence of God is there even when we're not here? When we come in, we bring the presence of God, right? But people can start worshiping their church. They can start worshiping the building. They can start worshiping a cross. We have a tendency to do that. That's the reason in Exodus 24 it says, this is the Ten Commandments, do not make an idol for yourself, whether in the shape of anything in the heavens above or on the earth below or in the waters under it. We have to be careful what we impute holiness to. But there was a reason. He says, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He said, don't come any closer. And remember, he told him to take off his shoes. He says, this is holy ground. What made that holy ground was the fact that God was there and God made that holy. What makes this place holy, what makes that auditorium holy, is when we come into it and we worship together. It's not the physical building itself. You could build any building for that. Then the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people in Egypt. You notice he said, my people. What did he say back just before then? The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He didn't just say, I'm the God of heaven. I'm the God of all creation. I'm the God. He specified a particular group of people. He said of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why did he do that? Pardon me? Somebody say something? Why did he do that? Why did he say, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, instead of just saying, because it's through the covenant of Abraham, it's through the covenant made with this people, with his people, that he was coming to him as, not of all the people in the world. He said, then the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people in Egypt. So he's talking to my people, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the people of the covenant relationship, and have heard them crying out because of their oppressors. I know about their sufferings, and I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and bring them from that land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the territory of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. So because the Israelites cry for help has come to me, I have also seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing him. Therefore go, I am sending you to Pharaoh so that you may lead them, my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. For 400 years, he hadn't heard from his people. For 400 years, he hadn't spoken to his people. And all of a sudden, he comes to Moses. Part of that would make me believe, well, there's a couple things. God doesn't do things without a reason. And I think part of the reason that they stayed in the land of Israel, land of Egypt for 400 years is so that they could build it up into a mighty nation. And when they returned back to where they were, they could be more than just a small tribe and a small group of people. They could be a nation. But Moses asked God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, that I should bring the Israelites out of Egypt? John Adams in 1776 in a letter, he says, the management of so complicated and mighty a machine as the United Colonies requires the meekness of Moses, the patience of Job, and the wisdom of Solomon added to the valor of Daniel. It takes all of it. Here was Moses that God had chosen, and we won't get into it tonight because our time's running short. But we know that Moses wasn't too happy about the idea of being chosen to do this, but God had selected him. What are some reasons why God would have selected Moses, not just from a spiritual standpoint, but from a logical standpoint? He was raised in an Egyptian, so he understood the royalty. He understood the way that the Pharaoh's household worked. He understood. He was of a different class, a different people. He was a Jew. He was raised by them, but he was a Jew, and he had a connection with both groups of people, and they would have looked at him in a different way. And I like John Adams' way of putting it here. God did not make a mistake in choosing Moses. He picked him for a reason. Any questions or comments?